Hello everybody, it's your favorite West Virginia Space here, and Hamster and Gretel. The third series, or show, or whatever, may in part of the whole Phineas and Ferb setting, expand universe, I don't know what it is at this point, and ultimately it's definitely the worst out of the three. It's not bad, but it's definitely meh. You can it just doesn't have the same punch that the old two, especially Phineas and Ferb, had. And it's actually kind of hard to look at it after rewatching some of the Phineas and Ferb just a little bit, because it was just so much better. But I'm not here to explicitly get on how Phineas and Ferb is better. Rather, I want to talk about why the show is flawed. Well, more accurately, what keeps it back from greatness? As I think it actually boiled down to a few interesting points that all kind of link back up into each other. So, let's begin. The first and the most obvious point is the villains. If you didn't know there are any major villains in Hamster and Gretel, then, well, there are. Most of them have only been one-offs so far, but the show's only had one season, so at least some of them are likely to come back. But the problem is, for supervillains, they really do lack some punch. Now, granted, not every supervillain is like a Joker or a Lex Luthor that's iconic in their own right, but, you could surely do a lot better than what we got. Most of these villains, it's not even so much the powers, although sometimes it is the powers, but a lot of times they don't have any stage presence. They can't really build up a sense of fear or dread like, normal villains usually can. Really. I mean, it's look, I hate to make more Phineas and Ferb comparisons, but look at, Dr. Doofenshmirtz. For a comedic villain, he sure could be dangerous when the plot needed to be. He could be intimidating. These new villains just can't be intimidating. What's even worse is that, thanks to the Phineas and Ferb crossover episode, we actually do know that if Hamster and Gretel takes place in the Marvel universe, or at least one with several Marvel hero and villains established in it. So, worst case scenario, just borrow one of them or something for a bit. Just to have a villain that could actually reasonably pose a threat to the heroes and not just be the dumbest comedic waste ever. No offense. The next one is highly specific, but it's very true. Kevin. Now, he isn't necessarily a bad character, but he's just all over the place in a way that isn't entertaining or very well written. A lot of the trailers present him as this super jealous person who's always jealous about his sister getting superpowers and he didn't. But in the actual show, he really isn't. He just seems to accept that very readily without any issue. And then in the show, they sometimes present him as the responsible one. But even within that realm of responsibility, it's not even a major character trait. It's just when you're surrounded by people who take almost nothing seriously, having the tiniest bit of seriousness all of a sudden makes you the responsible one. And then even other bits present him as sometimes being smart, but then other times he's just average, which also contradicts themselves occasionally. And then you just get moments where the show wants you to set up that, everyone thinks he's kind of a lame loser, but he really is, he's not lame, but he's just there in the ultimate sense of the word. You have even other characters around him, like Fred, who literally have way more personality than, what Kevin has, and they're secondary characters, or tertiary, depending on how you count it. So it's why couldn't you give Kevin some better personality? But his problems actually get worse, but we'll go with that into our next point. The next one is tone and theming. Now, this is going to sound weird, but hear me out here. Now, Hamster and Gretel is a superhero show by its nature. It's a story about, heroes fighting villains, and by the nature of that premise, there's usually a little bit of tension and fear that, the villain must be stopped or a bad thing will happen. And the show does subscribe to this formula. It is, in theory, a traditional superhero story with a classical arc to it. However, the show kind of fails in that there's no tension in any episode. There's no fear or tension or gravitas to anything going on. It's things just kind of happen with no real feeling to them. There's no, I don't know how to explain it, but there's no real feeling that something is dangerous or bad could happen. And it gets even worse. You remember one of the main crux of the show is that Kevin, and to a lesser extent Fred, are completely normal people who often in episodes tag along with Hamster and Gretel, fighting villains who in some cases are legitimately powerhouses. In fact, given how powerful Gretel can punch, pretty much all the villains must have super durability of some variety. And here's the thing. These people scale to incredible powers. Some of them can literally throw giant cargo ships around. Cargo ships like they're just stuffed toys. Legitimately, that Kevin and Fred, and what they're doing, should be legitimately worried that they're going to be turned by a missed shot into fine red paste. Because that is the kind of insane power that people are getting mad that Superman has. But yet these people don't seem worried. I mean, it reminds me of the whole thing of Marco from Star Wars Reveal, how people point out how him being able to survive getting his body thrown into a rock strong enough to crack the rock should have broke his back or killed him. But yet it just feels like there's no tension in it. And it just ignores some obvious things. And what's even worse is that Phineas and Ferb got this right. Even Milo Murphy's Law. Milo Murphy's Law, a literal show where everything goes wrong to a varying degrees, got the tension of things going wrong correctly. Phineas and Ferb, despite being a much more traditional comedy show in the vein of Hamster and Gretel, and they wanted to have a more serious moment or have the villain or the threat pose a threat, they got it right. During the Meep episodes, the villain posed a threat. When they wanted Dr. Doofenshmirtz to mean something, they could do that. When bloody Carl turned evil, he was more intimidating than any villain on Hamster and Gretel. And that's dude, Carl, the unpaid intern. And what's even worse is that they literally have done superhero episodes in Phineas and Ferb, and guess what? Those episodes were much better structured and toned than the prime superhero show. It's just how? How do you do that? Actually, speaking of which, is that how they're going to cross over the show? Hamster and Gretel gonna meet the Beak? Is that what they're going to do? I'm curious. One of the last things I want to mention, though, is the aliens themselves. The beings that are giving out powers to random people, telling some to be good and some to be evil. It also kind of falls into that tension thing I mentioned, where they're supposed to be this kind of big, opposing, ominous threat, but they got no personality other than comedic relief behind them. Dude, worst case scenario, take a page out of Bill's playbook, or the giant Newt King from Amphibia, or literally any Disney villain. Seriously. And I'm sorry, I know some people are theory crafting what's their deal, but I just can't be bothered to care. These aliens have no screen presence and no intimidation, despite supposedly setting themselves up to be the big bad of the series, or at the very least have a massive story coming to them slowly. But yet they got no screen presence, literally. But dude, I just can't bring myself to care. I would care so much more if they showed a random image of Bill Cipher hanging on the show. I'd be like, what the heck's going on with that? Overall, I know we just spent the last few minutes tearing into Hamster and Gretel like it's the worst thing ever, but I have to stress, the show isn't awful. It's even okay in my opinion. It's not bad, it just has some flaws in it. And there's a few other things I can nitpick about the show, but I want to stress, the things I mention here does not make Hamster and Gretel a bad show. It just keeps it back from being a great show. Something that could truly stand up with Phineas and Ferb as its equal. But it's kind of sad because the premise is cool. I've even thought up a similar idea that I've even shown on the channel that is not exactly the same but has some similarities. I do want to talk more about that some other time. But ultimately, though, I don't think the show is necessarily a loss. Season 2 has been announced, and I fully believe that if they take the points I've made, or more accurately, they themselves have probably realized this also, they're smart people, that the show has some flaws. If they could improve on these things, fix up the writing and some characters a little bit, and implement proper tension, then the show could be great. And I don't want to be too mean, because like I said, it's the first season of this show, and the season 2 is already greenlit, so they have plenty of time to really get the act going. I fully believe Hamster and Gretel could be the show where people say, yeah, the first season's a bit not as good, but trust me, if you're willing to stick through to season 2 or whatever, season 3, then the show really picks up. And I really believe it can do that. I really do think it can. But ultimately, that's just the state of the show right now, and honestly, no one's talking about it, so I thought somebody should, so I'll be that somebody. Also, my Big City Greens video did crazy well, so, I'll see if this works again. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts on the show or any other ideas, then please comment down below, and I'll see you all next time. Yeah? Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.